So we're going to record it so anyone that couldn't log in can get it later. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our first installment of our online seminars for the winter of 2023. Thank you all for tuning in. We had about 70 registrants that signed up. I will get a tally at some 45 are signed in right now. So that's pretty awesome. Obviously a topic that people had interest in. And one I have interest in. So, where some of the seminars I do, I'm doing a lot of talking. Tonight, I hope to do as much listening as everybody else. So we got two guys with us that experienced once, maybe twice in a career type of incident. And, we want to run through it tonight. We hear a lot of times, oh, it can't happen in our town, or, we'll never see something like that. And I think as you go through it tonight, even just from the little stuff that I've read that they experienced, it's definitely some good learning tools. And I think the takeaway for tonight, and then I'll turn it over to them, is I'm not here saying, hey, everyone needs to be trench rescue certified or anything like that. It's a very intense labor and equipment intensive type of incident, but it can be something that happens in any town. And so I'm sure Stony Hill and Bethel took away certain things that maybe they could do even without the equipment and whatnot. And I think that's the big takeaway tonight, is to hopefully, guys will see that there's stuff that they can do that still will help make, who are we going to call and what can we do in the meantime until they get there. So without further ado, let's introduce our speakers tonight. I'll start with Pat, who I've known for a long time. So Pat Magyar, are you there?
Yep.
You got video on and everything as well?
Yeah.
All right. So why don't you just give us a quick background of your bio, if you will, and then I'll turn it over to Kevin.
So at the time of this incident, I was the assistant chief at Stony Hill. I just recently moved out of town, so I resigned from that position. Member there for about 15 and a half years. And you want me to get into just that day?
Just about you. And not everyone knows you. If they're not on Facebook all the time, maybe they don't know who you are. So
so like I said, I joined there at 16, rose up the ranks to assistant chief before I left the department. Fire 1, Fire 2, instructor. Never had any
flash fire logistics.
Oh yeah, that's a huge part of my resume.
So you never had what? Sorry.
No background or history with trench. This incident was my first interaction with any kind of trench rescue or anything like that. That's pretty much it.
All right, cool. Kevin, why don't you give us your background before we get into the incident itself?
Sure. My name is Kevin Lunnie. I'm now a captain in Danbury. I've been on the job there a little more than 15 years. For the past 6 years, before getting promoted, I was assigned to our heavy rescue company, which got converted to a squad company just after this incident. Outside of the fire department, I'm one of the owners of Vector Rescue. Been kind of nerding out about tech rescue for 10, 15 years. Licensed as a medic, don't practice anymore. Stopped working on an ambulance like 8 years ago. But like Pat, started volunteering when I was like 18 or so in Monroe. So I've been in the fire service a little more than 20 years, just about.
Cool. Before we get into the incident, just so everyone knows, I have the chat window up here. So the way usually these work well is, from my experience, I can't talk and read at the same time. So as Kevin and Pat are talking, if anyone has any questions that they want to interject or some clarification, just put it into the chat window and it'll come to me, and then I can ask our participants. And also scrolling through, some of the people we have in the chat, I know that they're in the seminar. I know that there are some people from Bethel, Stony Hill, whatnot. So if you guys have anything to add, please feel free as well. And there may be some guys from Danbury. I don't recognize any of the names off the top of my head, but please feel free also to put it in the chat. And, you guys can also, tune in, if you will, on video. We're happy to do that as well. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and start on the timeline. And Pat, as I'm doing that, why don't you kind of just run through what you remember from that day, how everything came in, and we'll just start it in that sense.
Okay.
So you guys should be able to see my screen now, and it has a basic timeline of the incident. So Pat, go ahead.
Okay, so
Well, Pat, can you see the screen? Is it what I'm showing?
yeah, yep.
Okay, so go ahead.
So the day kind of started out, Chief John Baker and I were at the firehouse. We had a meeting with a vendor. We just wrapped that up. We were sitting there talking. I believe it was about 1:08 p.m. Bethel Car One, who his background, he works for the utility department for the town, and he was sent to this address on Bud Drive, I believe, to help the contractor locate the lateral connection to the water, or I believe the water system. And they were having trouble locating it, so I think they requested he come out there to assist. He gets there and finds these guys frantically digging in a hole. The collapse had happened prior to his arrival, and they had been digging for unknown exactly how long, several minutes before he had gotten there. They hadn't called 911 yet. He gets on his radio and calls it in over the air. And then about a minute later, both departments are dispatched. And right as units start signing on, Danbury's trench rescue trailer and their manpower was requested. So myself, Chief Baker, and then another firefighter showed up to the firehouse for the call. We go en route approximately 1:13 p.m. Danbury's dispatched approximately 4 minutes later at 1:17 p.m. And they were dispatched with a full rescue assignment. As you can see here, 2 engines, rescue truck, TAC, with the trench trailer. We get on scene. Yeah, just about 1:13 p.m. Again, it's myself, the chief, and one firefighter who was essentially pretty green, just got his fire one, obviously no background with any trench stuff like that.
Talk to us. What were your initial actions? What did you guys do until Danbury got there?
So I walk up to the hole and see a familiar face inside. Rich Thode, who's the chief of the city of Danbury, lives pretty close to that neighborhood, a couple minutes away. He received a phone call from somebody else who heard it on the scanner, told him about it. So we get there, he's already in there, and that was a pretty big relief. He's just one of those guys, when the shit hits the fan, someone that you want there. So he directs us. He said there's a bunch of plywood in the rear of the house. So we start going around back to the house and getting all this plywood to put around the hole to kind of shore up just in case anyone was walking around the hole. And then we just went in and we started digging by hand. Couldn't really see the patient at all. I believe they had some sort of makeshift shoring that they made themselves as a precaution, that he was pinned in between in the dirt and plywood, so you couldn't really see him at all. And we kind of just started getting all the construction workers out of the hole. There was probably 5 or 6 guys that were there working that were inside. Got them out, and we were just started kind of digging by hand, waiting for Danbury to get there.
I'm here. I was just grabbing a notepad to write down notes. So I want to back up. Who was he? What were they doing? Was it a company? Was it a homeowner just renting a backhoe? What was the backstory of what they were actually trying to do there?
They were hooking up to either this, I think it was a water connection to the town water system, or sewer. I don't know if Chief McCollum is on. And I believe it was the homeowner. It wasn't it was a company, but it was the homeowner working.
Okay.
So
water line. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So once, and I'll kind of jump back and forth, but once Danbury got there, what was the main and once you know what, I'll come back to that. So Kevin, you, before we get into your response, you kind of gave me a little bit of background on how trench capability in Danbury even came up. So I think that's kind of an interesting backstory before we get into the actual incident, if you want to kind of start there and then get into how the day went.
Yeah, for sure. For at least 20 years, we've had kind of some form of trench capability. We had a trench rescue more than 20 years ago, or a little more than 20 years ago, that ultimately was a recovery. And kind of over the course of the past 20 years, mostly member driven, had built out a trailer with a cache of panels with strong backs attached, lumber, nailers, a generator, stuff like that. Nothing was really mounted, it was kind of all just in the trailer. It was there. And every couple of years, guys would go and take trench tech as it was kind of made available in the area. And I think like 12 years ago, we hosted trench tech in Danbury and sent, I want to say like 10 or 12 guys through it. And then since then we have not hosted it, but usually it's the same thing every year. A couple guys will go take it. Over the past 10 years, there's been no real kind of formalized refreshers every year. Any training that was done on collapse, shoring, strut work was company level training or shift level training. But we have had no kind of big annual refresher by any means, which is, I think a challenge in any discipline that we all face. We have competing interests that kind of creep up every year, and trench is a low frequency event for sure. So in the kind of winter of 19 going into 20, trench had been on everybody's radar, at least the guys in the rescue company, and kind of redoing the trailer, getting more gear. We didn't have struts on the trailer at that point. We had a complement of gray Paratech struts on the heavy rescue, and we had taken delivery of a set of the Rescue Jack Super X, which were also on the heavy rescue. So we had an interim chief that came in kind of in a transition period for us, and approached the company kind of in the middle of COVID and said, hey, we have this kind of found money that's in our rescue equipment budget. Do you guys have a wish list? And we kind of always kept a running wish list of stuff we needed, stuff we wanted. So in the event that there was ever found money, we had prices and quotes and everything more or less ready to go. And we kind of unanimously agreed that trench was kind of a big one for us. So all the people in the company worked together, kind of dialed in a equipment list. We ended up going with a Paratech 12 strut trench kit. So it came with the controllers, the regulator, 12 struts, extensions, whole 9 yards, a huge complement of hand tools, lumber, and the company themselves, largely led by kind of two guys, Phil Espedy and Roger Bohan, did the majority of the install themselves. So from the ground up, I've got some cool pictures of what it looks like once we kind of get into that, and simultaneously requested funding for training. So we went on CMC, ultimately is who we went with. We brought in CMC Rescue, and in the fall of 2020, we brought in CMC Rescue and put the entire rescue company and the entire truck company through trench tech. And this call came in like a little more than 6 months later after we put 28 people through it. So, from an administrative perspective, it went well, not because anyone's great. It went well because of the time and money invested in training and equipment. And, it worked out that it came in like 6 months later. The stars aligned, and I'm like wholly confident that that gentleman's alive because of like the time and money spent on training and equipment.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, on that note, how many guys did you initially send to this incident out of town?
16 was the initial.
16.
Yeah. And
So go ahead.
I was just say that. So that's the initial heavy rescue response that Pat listed out. 2 engines, the truck, the rescue, the shift commander, and the TAC with the trailer. And then a whole bunch of our command staff came as well.
And that's about, for those that are interested, that's about 2 or 3 times the amount that a lot of other towns were going to send. I kind of did a informal asked towns and cities that I knew that had trench equipment, hey, if X, Y, and Z town, 2 towns away, 1 town away calls for a trench response, what are you initially sending? And most of them said an area of 5 to 10 guys. So definitely, as you guys, I'm sure we'll touch on tonight, it's it's a very labor intensive operation, and even 16 guys, I bet everyone had a point where they were working, whether it be hooking up struts, hooking up, holding panels, whatever the case may be. So definitely very labor intensive type of operation, and a lot of equipment as well. And even if it's not labor intensive, just getting the equipment from point A to point B. I don't know, was this in the backyard or a front yard? Or how close were you able to get your trench equipment to the incident?
We got pretty lucky. We showed up pretty quick. To be honest, it was ironic. Me and my company were grocery shopping for dinner, and the shift commander heard the request on the scanner that Bethel made, that the chief made. So he called me on my cell phone and said, "Hey, start heading to Bethel." So by the time we got toned out, we were getting off exit 8, heading up into Bethel. So from dispatch to on scene, we were on scene in like 3 minutes.
Nice.
Unfortunately, the truck that the victim was driving was parked like right in front of the trench, or slightly offset. So it was right on the road. I've got some good pictures just showing how close it is. And the trench trailer made it probably 2 car lengths away.
Yeah, so that's pretty good.
It was very close, yeah.
He wasn't digging in his backyard or something like
No.
that where you would have had to shove everything down. So, all right, well, I figured let's turn it over to you. So we've kind of gone through what Pat did, what the initial stuff that they did was. We learned now that you guys were there pretty quick. So take it away. I'm not going to get in the way. Take it away. Let us know how it went, what you guys did, and then we'll get into it. We'll get into some other questions and stuff towards the end.
Yeah, for sure. I will preface with I'll share my screen. I've got kind of like a slideshow. I'm not a big lecture person. I much prefer stuff to be interactive. So if anyone's got any questions at all, kind of as we're on slides, looking at pictures, I think there's a lot of really good stuff to talk about. Shoot a message in the chat. Dan's going to keep an eye on it, and he'll interject. And if he wants to acknowledge somebody that wants to ask a question, make a comment, please, by all means. I think it's really good if we can kind of go through it together and learn stuff. All right, everyone got that? Dan, we good?
Yep, we're good.
So this stuff I'll skip through pretty quick. We just kind of talked about this, but that's kind of the before and after. I'm really impressed. The major build was done by the 2 guys who worked for me when I was a lieutenant on the rescue. They designed and installed every single thing in that trailer. And it's kind of been tweaked a little bit, kind of as we've kind of figured stuff out. And as a result of the trench incident, there's stuff we want to add, move around a little bit, which I think you'll find kind of with anything you go through. So I think Pat touched on most of this stuff, but this local resident was making a sewer hookup. What was challenging about this and interesting, the house was pretty well below grade from the road. Standing on the road, I think it was a raised ranch, if I recall. You were kind of looking at the ridge line almost. And so it ended up with almost like a 14-foot deep trench, kind of right off the road, like a foot off the road, and then kind of turned into a walkout at the other end. From what we could gather, he kind of had used a mini excavator to start digging, got as deep as the machine was capable, and didn't make it. He then rented a bigger mini excavator and kind of drove it into the walkout end of the trench to keep digging. And like Pat said, it sounds like he kind of missed the sewer hookup by a couple feet. From what I gather, he called Public Works and said, "Hey, we can't find it. Can you send somebody out here?" And while they were waiting for the chief from Bethel to show up, who also worked for Public Works there, is when the collapse happened. So from what we could tell, the remnants in the bottom of the trench, it looked like there was probably 2 sheets of 4x8 OSB on each side of the trench prior to collapse, and we found some 2x4s in. So it looks like that's all they had. It was just at the bottom, kind of on the horizontal plane, so 4 feet high, 8 feet long, in the bottom of the trench. They started digging right, is our guess. So if you're looking at like the walk out into the trench up towards the road, they started digging into the wall of the trench to try to find the hookup. And from what I can gather, I've looked at a lot of pictures and kind of done a lot of research on types of trench collapse just because I'm a nerd and wanted to know. From what I can tell, it was what's called a rotational failure. So instead of kind of a shear wall where it just topples over in a rotational failure, it kind of all collapses down and then rockets across the bottom of the trench, which is kind of consistent with how we found him. He was ultimately pinned between the 2 sheets of OSB. Unfortunately, Most of the material had come up under and over the top of the OSB, so it didn't just create a giant void space for him. Most of the material had also kind of filled up between the two sheets of OSB, kind of leaving only his head kind of visible. I kind of guessed when I got there, he was 9 to 10 feet down. We kind of got the size up from the chief and some of the other Stony Hill and Bethel guys that were on scene, and our chief grabbed me. I said, he's awake, he's talking, like, it's a rescue, we got to move. So that's our response. Pat kind of went over that. From our report, I got shoring started around 1:30, so like 10 minutes after the rescue got there. At some point, it kind of got brought up. I think I asked Pat, like, hey, did you guys request a vac truck yet? He said they hadn't. So like 10 minutes after shoring started, we requested a vac truck from our water department. We have a pretty good relationship with them. And now as a result of this, they're actually on our run card for trench rescues. So kind of on that note, if you have good contacts in your own towns with your public works or your water department, reach out, see what their capabilities are. These are often subject matter experts that are in trenches every day, and sometimes unstable trenches that have kind of water undermining. And they're a great resource to get on the assignment with, but more importantly, I think to train with in advance. So the vac truck got there at 13:59. And I will tell you unequivocally, this took almost 2 hours, I think, from start to finish. It would have taken twice as long, I think, if we had to hand dig and move everything with 5-gallon buckets. So the vac truck was really kind of mission critical, I think, in getting this done. I heard through the grapevine, and I don't know if it's accurate or not, but when they dumped the vac truck back at their yard, I think they pulled 4 yards of material out of it. So quite a bit of material was moved out of the hole. So this is helmet cam still from Pat. So we're going to kind of go through these slowly and kind of talk about them as best we can. The right where the cop is standing is more or less where he was, just a few feet in from that. And you can see kind of the big U at the top of the wall where the collapse happened. The spoils pile is still very close. I think they had just started putting down the ground pads when this shot was taken. I think this is right after they got on scene. I believe our chief had kind of directed, and you may see it in later shots, the bucket from the excavator was brought down and pushed up against the wall kind of farther away in this picture, trying to help kind of put some pressure on that wall to keep the spoils pile from interacting with it. On the note of kind of initial actions, one of the things that is really helpful is to start moving the spoils pile. So especially in a town that is waiting for mutual aid resources, or even waiting for their own tech rescue team, getting people with shovels to move the spoils pile back is huge, because all of that weight is interacting with the exposed wall now that it's already had a failure. OSHA, I think, says like 2 feet back from the lip. Certainly the farther back you can get it, the better, because it allows access, kind of reduces that force on the ground. It's going to kind of impact the wall, but it's a great thing to start doing, is just moving the spoils pile away from the hole. So this is much later in the incident, but just kind of another perspective. So this is kind of looking back towards the trench. I don't think there's anything super interesting to look at there. Again, this is kind of later in the incident, but I put this one in here because I wanted to talk about the shoring. If we look back at that big gaping hole, it was a phenomenal amount of material that was missing. And even with high pressure bags, low pressure bags, even with low pressure bags, you would have needed a phenomenal amount to fill in that spot behind the panels, or filling, bags with the spoils pile. So we kind of had a quick debrief almost immediately after us arriving. I got put in charge of operations, and one of the other lieutenants who was on the TAC that day, who's also a boss on the rescue, he was on overtime, I think was put in charge of the rescue group, or a squad maybe. And we kind of all had a quick powwow, myself, the captain, this lieutenant, about how to kind of shore across that big void without enough, low pressure bags or fill to get behind there. And we ended up using whalers. And you can see, if you see the gentleman in the yellow vest and gray helmet, kind of just to the left of the vac truck tube, we dropped a 12-foot 6x6 whaler sticking out of the end of the trench up against the uncompromised portion of the wall on an angle down low into the trench, and then put another one low in the trench. So we had something to put the panels on, and it was super hasty. We were all kind of like, but it really was the best choice we had to get the panels in place and kind of protect that side of the trench. And it ended up working out very, very well. And I'll tell you in advance, this is my first and probably only actual trench incident, and nothing at all like the trenches we did in training. In training, just like many other things, right? You have kind of good soil and nothing's been compromised, and even the simulations of compromised are not necessarily realistic. And I think technically this was super challenging. It was very helpful to have the water department guys there. That's who that is. The gray helmet with like the stripe laying down by the head of the trench is also someone from the water department, and they were beyond beneficial. That's looking from the front yard back up to give you some perspective on depth. And from the side, and you can kind of see where the head of the Stokes is, where the shovel's leaning up that bottom right of the picture, the other end of that 12-foot whaler kind of going across the bottom. We had to have somebody up top kind of spot where the struts were going to be placed. So the strut on the left panel and lower were actually placed right on the whaler and not just kind of randomly on the strong back. One of the problems we ran into, and I've got another picture kind of showing where the victim is. If you look kind of at the bottom of the top panel, you'll see some wedges and OSB. That's actually where the head of the victim is. And when we dropped the first panel, we had no visual on the victim's head. And the strong back ended up, like 2 inches above where his head ended up being. So once they got this deep, the conversation then immediately started of like, we might need to add another 4-foot section of panel and another strong back below this. So we were kind of coming up with a shoring plan to work around his head, because they would have to be offset from the existing struts that got placed. Fortunately, we didn't go much deeper than this, and I've got one more picture to show you the depth. But it was like right at that point where we were all starting to get uncomfortable with, like, if we go any deeper, we have to add another set of panels below this. And we had somebody on the side kind of drawing up a shoring plan to kind of work around his head. So that's the other side of the trench. And again, the panels are sticking up probably 2 or 3 feet above the lip. So they're probably 9 feet down at their waist, if we had to guess. And by the book, certainly are like right at the limit for that lower strut on getting another strut placed. So this is much later in the incident, but it kind of gives you some perspective on what we were working with. The neon yellow is his safety shirt. You can see the kind of broken off piece of OSB up top, and then right behind the strong back, that's the other piece of OSB on the opposing trench wall. The first probably half an hour, 45 minutes of the incident, I guess half an hour of digging was by hand and moving material out with buckets. And the guys would dig down, a couple inches using, I think they had a Sawzall in there. And some other tools trying to cut away the OSB, and it was filled up on both sides. So they dig, break it off, dig, break it off. And once they got his kind of face exposed, they put an oxygen mask on him. We had a meter in the trench that got dropped down and just hung there the whole time. I think I forgot to mention that. But you can see how close that is to his head, kind of where the bottom of the strong back is. And it was just dumb luck that that's where we dropped the panel. So one of the things we kind of started talking about, and I threw a whole bunch of stuff up here. I'm a firm believer in like tech rescue is just like a medical incident with complicating factors to get the patient out. So any team that does any kind of tech rescue really needs to kind of be patient focused in the way we think about it. Because if you do all this great shoring or rope work or whatever it is, but you don't think about like the human that's sitting there waiting for you, you're going to end up with a recovery every time. So very generically, right, we were worried about like, fractures, obviously, hypoxia, traumatic asphyxia. He was breathing and talking, so we knew, he was at least able to move his lungs. Crush injuries, compartment syndrome, drowning was a big one we talked about after the fact. he was looking for a sewer line, and had he got lucky and hit it before the trench collapsed, we would have had a phenomenal amount of water in the trench. So having a plan to have a submersible pump that can move a significant amount of water in the time frame between when the vac truck gets there, I think is really important. Hypothermia, and then any other kind of random things that might kind of be associated with it. These are the two big ones, and this is not a medical class, so I'll like rush over these quick. But crush injuries to extremities, usually to what's called rhabdomyolysis, and it's a result of muscle death. And when your muscles are compressed for a long time and then released, myoglobin and potassium kind of get reperfused into the bloodstream. And all this stuff builds up the longer the crush injury is happening, as well as metabolic acid, and all that stuff gets released back. And in a healthy person, best case scenario, it's cardiac dysrhythmia. But unfortunately, a lot of these lead to renal failure, which will ultimately lead to death if not kind of managed. The clinical considerations, and I threw this in here because this is kind of what led our decision-making process. This is right out of the pre-hospital trauma life support, the newest edition. The key to improving outcomes in these incidents is early and aggressive fluid resuscitation. And success depends on minimizing the toxic effects of all that stuff that's built up. And it really emphasizes that resuscitation needs to happen before extrication. And in their studies, a delay in fluid resuscitation will result in renal failure in 50% of patients. And, it's something worthwhile considering. Again, not a medical class, but, pulling a live person out that you didn't manage and like cheering about it, and then they end up having renal failure because you didn't treat them when you could. I don't know if that's a win or not. If you have the people there to treat them and you don't, and this person ends up in renal failure, you own that. And I think that's really important to acknowledge. And then the other big one is if you don't do anything and then you get them out of this crush injury, whatever it is, that there's a very good chance they're going to go into cardiac arrest. And that's something we talked about near the end. Once we did get him out, getting the ambulance as close as possible. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. The other big one is compartment syndrome, which usually goes hand in hand. It's a limb-threatening condition that once the blood supply has been reduced by increased pressure, so this can be machinery incidents as well, that inside the muscle fascia, all this fluid builds up, and basically, or it could be blood. Even once the limb is removed, because there's so much swelling, can actually reduce or completely obstruct blood flow to the limb, and it can be a limb-threatening injury as well. The definitive treatment for that is ultimately a surgical fasciotomy, and they basically take a scalpel and open up your muscles from the outside to release the pressure that's compressing all the vessels inside. This gentleman did have major surgical fasciotomies on both legs at Yale as a result of this incident. He did have compartment syndrome. So we'll talk about that. At 2:45, so like an hour and 15 minutes into the operation, he started telling the guys in the hole with him that he couldn't feel his legs and feet anymore. And a little before 3 o'clock, we got one arm out and his head completely uncovered. So the decision was made very quickly to put a medic in the trench. One of the Danbury medics was there. We put a helmet on him. We had a joke. He kind of laughed. He's like, "Is it safe?" We're like, "Yeah, probably. We'll figure it out together." So it was completely short at that point, and we had been rotating people in like 15-minute increments through digging. So we took a break from digging, put him in. He started patient care, did an IV, did fluid management, and a whole bunch of medications for crush injury. What was interesting is that at some point in the operation, and I don't have a timestamp on it, maybe Pat does, the medic supervisor on scene was in constant contact with med control, and the suggestion was made to have Lifestar fly, not for transport initially, because this scene is maybe what, Pat, 10 minutes from the hospital tops?
Yeah, pretty close.
To get advanced care on scene. They were trying to get a surgeon or one of the ER docs, and the ER, I guess, was swamped and they couldn't send somebody into the field. So they suggested sending Lifestar out, not necessarily for transport, but to have, advanced different medications that the medics in Danbury weren't carrying, and I'm not sure what they had in mind. But they could do fasciotomy in the field, among other things. So they kind of went back and forth, and they kept checking in with me in an operational level, going like, hey, when's he coming out? And I, couldn't answer that, obviously. So I think finally around 3:15, they made the decision to call the helicopter. And what I heard, and please don't count this as gospel, is that ultimately, based on the length of him being pinned, Danbury Hospital said, you know what, if the helicopter's flying, we can't manage some of this stuff anyway, we'll probably transfer him. So the decision was made to fly him directly to Yale. So he was finally freed at, it should say 15:30. I'm sorry, it's not 15:09, or 15:39 maybe.
Yeah, I had 15:39.
Okay, yeah, that was my fault. So 15:39, he came out of the trench, went into an ambulance and was transported like 5 minutes away to a field, and Lifestar flew him to Yale. So that's the medic down there. Like I said, we kind of stopped operations, let him get down there. The bag got hung. I think we changed O2 bottles at that point. Once we got his head out, we put a helmet on the victim. And I think somebody put safety glasses on him as well, which is another thing I think that gets overlooked. And we're not perfect at it by any means. But I think one of the other takeaways is making like a patient PPE bag is probably a good idea. Helmet, safety glasses, blanket, a turnout coat that you can't use for structural firefighting anymore, but at least you can have something other than the invincibility cloak of the hospital sheet. I see it get overlooked all the time in trench, rope, confined space, vehicle extrication. Make a kit, put something together for victims, and as soon as you can, you should put the same level of PPE on them as you expect your rescuers to have. We talked a lot after the fact internally, and I've kind of talked about this at the EMS Pro conference as well, about putting EMS personnel kind of in these situations. And I think it really should be a patient-driven event. The initial stages of shoring, I certainly believe that technician level people and whatever the discipline is should be doing the work. I think that's very important because it's not just about the physical skills of placing a strut. It's about looking at the soil, looking at the shoring, kind of understanding what you're looking at, and kind of making decisions tactically on what's safe. But once you've determined, like in this case, the trench is safe and shored, I don't see any kind of problem with putting PPE on a paramedic and putting him in the hole, because I do firmly believe that this ultimately is what helped save his life, among other things. And I think it's really important. I think that's something you can talk to your local EMS agency about, do cross training in. And I'm not saying you have to have them digging, but get them aware of what we do, an awareness level class that can be a drill night, if it's a volunteer agency, or that can be cross-trained in a career agency, to kind of teach their, EMTs and medics about basic trench hazards, awareness level stuff for all disciplines. I think it's super important. So that's the other end of the trench, just to give you an idea on depth of where the medic was working. This, and I want to talk about it, end shoring is a real challenge. And, in class, depending on what kind of school you came from, a lot of agencies used to teach thrust blocks, which is now out in some of the new curriculums. There's a lot of friction systems with double whalers. And initially we didn't do an end shore because it really was virgin soil, well compacted under the road. And none of our techs on scene were super worried about that end, nor were the water department folks. But once they started digging more and got a little deeper, I believe his name is Chris Gardner. I think is the director of the water department, if I'm not mistaken. Is I think wearing the gray helmet, kind of leaning on the end shore there. It was like, hey, we should probably end shore this. And he started like rattling off ideas to me. And I said, do you know what you're talking about? And he goes, yeah, we do this every day. I said, great. And I grabbed two firemen that were standing, in staging, waiting for work. I said, guys, come over here, listen to him, build whatever he wants. It's I don't want to say it's a gamble, but you have to, I think, in the fire service, like lean on subject matter experts when it's possible, and know the limit of your ability. And I've met Chris plenty of times. I know him personally. I trust him, and he's like, yeah, no, we're good. This'll work. And we didn't have anybody else to do it at that point. So he ran the plan by me. I was like, yeah, okay, I like it. So we dropped kind of whalers down in the bottom across. You can kind of see one below one of the struts, and then a 6x6 across the top, kind of supported by the panels. And dropped another sheet in behind that. I think it's worth, like I said, training with those guys in advance and getting on the same sheet of music about kind of what the plan is, because they do have, at least in our city, hydraulic shores, speed shores that they have on a trailer with like a little crane and they can bring out. So sometimes that might be an option, is dropping, a speed shore in that they carry. Not saying it's the like savior for everything, but so that's kind of the down and dirty of it. My big takeaways, I think I kind of prefaced with, it's a high risk, low frequency event, like a lot of the other tech rescue stuff we do. And Dan alluded to it earlier, you don't have to do everything. And I think it's okay to not, because you have to kind of base it on money and time and resources, but you need to know who to call. And I think the best thing anybody can do is figure out what the extent of your ability is, and then reach out to the surrounding communities and know who you're calling, as your first phone call. Hey, this is beyond our ability. We can't do this. We're calling USAR. We're calling whoever, is around you that has the capability. Because we joke about it with cell towers. You get a 400-foot guide AM FM tower. If your department doesn't do cell tower rescue or tower rescue, figuring it out the day of is not the safe bet. So finding out what your local resources are, I think, is super beneficial. Making those connections with Public Works, the water department, the medical stuff for the victim, I think is really important. And training regularly, I can't harp that enough. It is a once in a career event usually, but it's easy to get complacent about stuff and rest on your last big win. And stuff you do every day, throwing ladders, stretching lines, if that's what you do every day, you don't have to train on that as much maybe. But if you're not doing tech rescue every day, or you're not stretching lines every day, you're not throwing ladders every day, getting out, throwing struts, building a prop with mafia blocks, so you can at least get the panel placement and the strut placement. I mean, there's ways to train on this stuff without digging a trench. Because trench specifically is really hard, because you have to dig a trench to really get into it versus doing rope or confined space. But you can make those relationships, I think, with your Public Works or water department, where they're going to do training, or maybe you can make it mutually beneficial training. You might be able to facilitate it more.
Awesome. Pat, anything to add, or any comments on everything Kevin went over?
No, he really pretty much hit everything. Like you said, just knowing your limitations and your department's abilities is a huge thing. Stony Hill is a small department, probably about 350 fire calls a year. 0 of them, usually are trench rescue or, very in-depth technical rescues. So we knew right away, that we had to call in Danbury. They had the training, the equipment, the manpower, just like if we had a structure fire, same thing, they have the manpower and the equipment. So it's no different.
Cool. So once Danbury got going and doing all the operations, what was Bethel, Stony Hill? What were you guys kind of doing as support roles at that point?
We pretty much, both departments had guys in the hole as well. Swapping in and out, just because, like I said before, the vac truck got there. We were digging, with shovels and 5-gallon buckets. So we were, there was a group about 4 or 5, maybe 6 of us that were assisting them in the hole for most of the time.
Okay, cool. Kevin, once you guys got him freed, because I know sometimes obviously trench rescues can then become almost a mini high angle operation. Were you able to just lift him out with the Stokes by hand, or did you guys have to set up any sort of removal system for him?
No, we got very lucky. Was unlucky for him, but because of the way they dug the trench and because of the house being below grade, it was just about a walkout at the machine end. It was a couple steps, but with the manpower we had there, we just kind of lined up some people and he came right out. We did have, like I said, we had a very serious discussion kind of privately at the command post about there's still a really good chance that he's going to go into cardiac arrest as soon as we get him horizontal and get him out of this hole. So I believe they kind of moved the family back, the police trying to kind of help corral everybody away. And I think he had a period of near syncope or something in the ambulance on the way to the helicopter, but never lost consciousness. His blood pressure bottomed out for a minute and they got it back. But I think, like I said, it was a very great series of events that lined up in a really positive way.
Mhm.
And if it wasn't for like the training 6 months prior, all the equipment, the outfitting, the trailer, the vast majority of the people who had gone through the training, like the whole rescue company was on duty that went through the training. The truck company was. The two
Mhm.
guys in the TAC on overtime were rescue guys that were on, on overtime that day in the TAC. So it worked out really, really well. And having all the help there, even, the awareness and operations level help at the cut station, just because you've never taken trench, if you're like bang nails any point in your life, hey, I need a piece of wood this long. People were making stuff happen, and shuttling stuff over. So it worked, I think, really, really well for all of those reasons.
And I know you touched on some of the things that a department that's calling for mutual aid can do, like with the spoil pile and whatnot. So I want to kind of go back to that, because I think, again, looking through, I think most people are not, don't have a trench cache in their department. And so let's talk about, what do you expect those first two units to do while they're waiting for their mutual aid or their trench rescue to get there? What do we want them to do in order to make the incident go smoothly when the trench companies get there, if you will?
I think, a lot of the stuff Pat started talking about, not everybody's going to show up with a cache of plywood, but if there's stuff you can repurpose, pirate, steal, whatever you want to call it, from neighbors, from the house. Getting ground pads put down around the whole edge of the trench is huge. Getting the spoils pile moved back as far as possible is huge. Getting a meter in the trench as soon as possible is huge. Ventilation in the trench is huge. We didn't have any vent concerns. We had great meter readings the whole time, so we never actually ventilated the trench. But even if it's a PP, if it's a battery powered or electric PPV fan at the head of the trench, just down in the trench would help. Staging rope equipment, if you have rope rescue equipment, getting a Stokes out, getting a medical bag out, really, really good size up and report. I know a lot of people are like hate on the NFPA for various reasons. But I do think that if you look in 1006, which is the technician ops and awareness JPRs for all tech rescue disciplines, the JPRs provide a really great training resource and kind of knowledge base for what you can train on. So if you look through them and pick them apart and say, okay, like at the awareness level, these are the things we need to understand. You can go buy a trench book for $80 and start picking it apart on drill nights, even if you have no intention of doing tech level stuff, to learn about like soil composition and types of collapse and signs of collapse. So when somebody shows up and you go, hey, we've got a big fissure here, they were digging here, there's a water line down there, there's a gas main down there. Getting as much information as you can prior to those resources showing up is huge. Going in the hole beforehand, because I've like gotten lots of questions on that. The only parallel I'll make is, we risk a lot to save a lot. So there's plenty of house fires that we go into. And so it's like my kids in that room, I know they're there, where you extend, right, vigilant and measured risk, and you put yourself at risk because there's a savable life. This guy was awake and talking, and it's like really easy to armchair quarterback, going in an unsure trench. But if it's a rescue versus a recovery, that's a conscious decision that every company officer's got to make every time they go to a fire. And it's certainly different than a fire, but as long as you know what you're risking for a savable life, that's a personal decision that you have to live with.
Absolutely. So a couple of questions, comments so far about how many people were in total for manpower, and thoughts of, well, he says, how much mutual aid do we need? So how many people did you guys have on scene between Bethel and Danbury? I'm trying to do quick math. You said you sent 16, and then Bethel, Pat, you didn't say, how many do you think you had?
I want to say it was about, including even down to like fire police, some of our EMS personnel that came out, probably a dozen.
So we're talking in the area of 30 or so, 25 to 30 people on scene.
Yeah, that feels about right. I mean, there's a lot of, we called for additional ambulance to stage for our folks that ran rehab. All our command staff was there, so we had like more help at the command post with all the phone calls that were getting made. But there was like a solid 20 people working for 2.5 hours straight.
Yeah.
We were like doing 15-minute operational periods. more or less. And it's tough, you know, as a company officer, you know, like I love doing, even now. And when you have guys that like think they're close, like I almost got it. And again, just like a fire, like we almost got it. We almost got it. I'd be like, guys, you got to get out of the hole. And no, like 2 more minutes. Like I'm going to get him out. And, you know, until 3:30, he didn't come out. And I think for incident commanders, company officers, you have to like be hard and fast on that stuff. You know, people have heart attacks all the time. You know, unfortunately, right, we just had a line of duty in North Haven. Somebody had a heart attack at a pump panel. So now you put somebody in a hole on a hot day, digging for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't help the scene at all. It doesn't help the victim, keeping people in a hole for half an hour. So being hard and fast on that was tough. Certainly got some pushback from our own guys, had some pushback from some of the Bethel guys. You know, it's the way it goes.
I think the other thing that we really talk about, and you talked about a lot of the preparatory things that can happen to help, and it looked like it wasn't an issue, but apparatus placement has to be addressed, both from first due companies to police officers to civilians showing up to whoever. You guys got lucky, it was in the front. But let's talk about apparatus placement a little bit, because I think all of us are going to show up and park in front. But at some point, we have to understand that, you know, the vac truck only has a certain amount of length on their tube. The trench, whatever's carrying the panels, you know, you want that as close as you reasonably can. And if this became a high angle removal, we'll probably want the tower ladder as close as possible for a possible high point. And so I think those are the 3 to 4 different pieces that, as a first due company, whether you're a career volunteer, doesn't matter, keep in mind what you're putting close to the scene. Make sure that you're leaving room for the specialized companies. And, you know, if this was in the backyard, the manpower that you needed probably would have been almost double to get all the wood, all the struts, controllers, never mind the vac truck, into the rear. And so just keep in mind that the manpower here, they got, I don't want to say lucky, it was in the front yard, it was literally at the street. And so that made a huge difference. I'm sure, I wasn't there, I'm sure that made a huge difference for being able to get equipment to the scene. If you want to just kind of touch on any of that stuff.
No, I mean, you know, we all have, you know, my entire time as a company officer was on our rescue. So you spend most of your career like holding short, parking farther back, like letting everyone else get in. So it was really nice to get like, you know, front row seating for once. But it's hard. And again, it's easy to like Monday morning quarterback it, right? If like the first due engine from, you know, Stony Hill was like, oh, we've got a trench, we should stop short. Unfortunately, we show up at engine companies often, or ladder companies, whoever's first, and you park like you're going on a medical often. You know, it's not on fire, so you're not worried about like, you know, placing the ladder truck. So even if you realize that sooner, you know, like even if you back up, you know, there was a truck park that we couldn't move at all, a pickup truck that was kind of in the way. The other big thing that I didn't really touch on, if you want to like nerd out about this stuff, there's like all kinds of math you can do on the force that's transmitted from parked vehicles that now is getting transmitted out into the open wall of the trench. And like the vac truck, we had to park there. You know, I don't know what the gross vehicle weight is. I'm sure it's 50,000 pounds. And we had to park the vac truck there. But if we could move fire trucks, you know, after we were kind of placed, you know, we talked about moving the excavator, but you know, moving the excavator kind of has consequences too. So you have to think about all that stuff. And I hate saying luck, but we did get, it was in the middle of the day. There wasn't a lot of people parked on the street. We got there very quickly with our rescue and kind of communicated like leave room for the trench trailer. And that was well communicated. We started, it was a horseshoe road. So we were directing a lot of the resources to come in the other side so they wouldn't block access.
I think that's a good point you bring up too, is not, you know, the excavator. So, well, 2 things. Number one is, as you said, or as Pat said, when the chief got there, they had already been digging the guy, or trying to dig the guy out. When we talk about a house fire, people see a house fire, they call 911. No one's calling 911 when a trench collapses. They are going to try to rescue their own. They're going to try, they say they have an excavator, they can dig it out. They're going to get in the hole, they're going to try to dig it out. Almost every trench incident I'm aware of was a delayed phone call to the fire department on some level. And so if we don't get many we get many times, oh, smoke from a house and it's not a house fire. there's not many times you get a report of a trench collapse with someone trapped and it ends up being BS, you know? So once we get to these, they're probably well within or well developed at that point where it's going to be a legitimate incident. And then the other thing is obviously moving equipment, as you touched on. You know, a lot of times they're in the way, but you have to balance moving them versus, you know, the vibrations that they're going to make, or just guys that, you know, construction workers may not be used to, for lack of a better term, working under the pressure. And so the guy that uses that excavator for 15, 20 years may move it the wrong direction and collapse the trench. Or there's very many incidents where they were trying to dig out their own guys and literally rip their limbs out because they just were too close to the victim. So, and they didn't realize it. So, and that's why we dig by hand. And even though you guys have the excavator there, it's not like you're going to take the excavator and try to surgically remove the dirt from around him. We're going to dig by hand. We're going to use the vac truck to our advantage. But it's really the first 2 units. It's about stabilizing the incident and not making anything, not allowing anything to get worse or anything like that.
Yeah, I think with a lot of tech rescue, and you know, we talk about it in training, but like treat it like hazmat. You know, isolate, deny entry, gather as much information as you can. And it's funny you mentioned operating the excavator. We did end up moving the bucket. We didn't move the machine. We have my one of my firefighters at the time has been operating machines since I think before he could drive a car. His dad owns a wrecking business, and we kind of consulted. I said, "You good on this machine?" He goes, "Yep, absolutely." I said, "Hey, we need the bucket up and out of the way."
Mm-hmm.
Again, a judgment call, like utilizing the resources on scene.
No, that's a lot different than trying to dig out.
Oh, yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, I just, you know, to the point you're making, like, I probably would not have had the civilian or the machine operator do it if I didn't know that, for those reasons you mentioned.
Absolutely.
But this is somebody who works with us, we trust, you know, and I think it's invaluable when you have those people on scene that can kind of make that stuff happen for you.
Oh, without a doubt. Even if he had, I assume he was trench trained, even if he wasn't trench trained, even if he wasn't, he's going to be one of your biggest resources at that incident, because this is something that he does every day. And that's something the fire service is good on some levels and bad on other levels. Like, we have to recognize, yeah, we're the firefighters, we're the rescuers, but there are people that do what we're about to do on a day in, day out basis and may have a better understanding of that stuff. So
yeah, and we, you know, it's funny because we seem to get, like, with electricians, we have no problem being deferential to them, even when they're a probie. Oh, you're an E1, great. What do we do? But then you get into some of these more kind of technically savvy disciplines, and all of a sudden, like, well, you're a probie. Like, I don't want to hear what you have to say, but this is somebody who was in building construction or whatever for 30 years before getting on the job. The other big one that I kind of forgot about as far as takeaways, and we just learned the hard way. You know, we bought like 10 Home Depot 5-gallon buckets and cut up a whole bunch of old life safety rope to make, you know, handles on them to pull the stuff out. I think we broke 4 handles in like 8 minutes, just overloading the buckets. And it was really heavy, wet dirt. And immediately after that, we started looking on Amazon, and they make like little webbing cradles with a webbing sewn handle that you can put 5-gallon buckets in that hold like 200 pounds. They're like $20 on Amazon. Absolutely a worthwhile buy, because you need to get the dirt out of the hole. And if you can't get a vac truck there, you're doing it by hand. And as soon as you break a handle off a Home Depot bucket, then you've got to, like, you know, have some rando who's standing around who like is doing operational level help figure out how to like make a basket hitch or something for the bucket. Otherwise, you're like passing it up. I think.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of started up, but what takeaways do you guys have? Anything that you guys adjusted on the trailer, or you know, stuff that you wish you thought of beforehand, any of that stuff? The only thing, and you already mentioned it, but most was the vac truck on the initial call. That's the only thing that I right away said, you know, that's something that, I mean, well before obviously in the city, that, you know, 2 vac trucks for any reported trench incident. And it's something that for towns that don't have any trench rescue, you probably still have a vac truck floating around somewhere in your town. So even if you're calling mutual aid trench, you probably have a vac truck that would get there before them and can get set up and ready to go. So just something to keep in mind with your, as you said before, your DPW or water company, or even construction companies out there have them. So just something to consider. But any other big things?
Yeah, and it's funny. Like I said, a lot of this is as we're talking about stuff, I'm thinking about other things. Having one person communicate with the vac truck operator, like assigning somebody, we found to be like mission critical, because like the victim would start talking, so somebody would yell, "Hey, shut it off!" So the guy would shut it off, and if the material hadn't cleared the high point in the vac truck yet, it would all drop back down. So we were having like rocks, like softball size rocks, fall back down out of the hose because they had shut it off before it cleared the U. So very, very quickly, it happened once or twice. We put somebody in charge, only listen to him. So he would lift it up, shake it, kind of have them take it up out of the way, and then shut it off. That was big. We realized it right away. We didn't have a submersible pump on the trailer at that point, which is now going to happen as a result of that. We have them elsewhere, but we're like, well, we should just have one on the trailer, something with enough capacity to move a lot of water. We don't pre-build our panels. It was just a decision we made because of fit. So we have 10 sheets of 3/4 CDX.
Yeah, but as you're talking about that, go back, if you could start the slideshow, share the screen, because it kind of goes in with what I was going to get into next, but since you're getting into it, we might as well do it all at once. I just want to kind of go over the anatomy of some of what's going on here. You mentioned like strong backs before and stuff like that. And I don't know that everybody knows what we're talking about. So kind of just run through, not necessarily how you shored, but what the different parts are. And things that I want people to take away is like the struts. You may have these struts on your rig, but that doesn't mean that you're just going to go throw them in a trench manually. There's ways to do it and whatnot. So just kind of give us the anatomy of kind of what's going on here with the shoring and talk about, that stuff.
Sure. Can you see my mouse on here?
Yes.
Cool. So kind of like, and lingo might be a little bit different, but this would be like the panel, the actual sheet of plywood. This would be the strong back. I've heard people call the whole system a strong back, depending on where you trained. The really big thing that I want to point out on this is, depending on where you train, the material you read, and how old it is, whatever you decide to use, if you're going to use it at all, make sure you have like engineered, stamped, approved shoring material. So the CMC came in, they did ours. All of their tabulated data is available on their website, stamped by an engineer. And what they taught was that one sheet of 3/4 CDX with a 2x12 strong back is good. You can do 2 sheets of 3/4 CDX or 1 sheet of Finform, which is just a really fancy white Arctic birch or something, very strong. Some other schools of thought teach LVLs. The group out of Michigan, Musar, Ron Zalaki's group, usually on the cutting edge of what's going on. They teach 3/4 Finform with LVLs here, and it's all about how much force it can resist. So you have struts, which can be wood or pneumatic. A lot of the kind of building departments, water departments use hydraulic shores. But to Dan's point, these are shot and set at like 200 PSI. So if you're using wood shoring, you really are cutting them long and then hammering them in with a mini sledge, because you actually want to compress those into the sides, because you don't want to have any movement at all, ideally. Our tabulated data was 2 feet from the bottom, 4-foot intervals on the struts. And again, it depends on the struts you have, if you're using wood, if you're using Paratech. So it all kind of has to work together. So the tabulated data you use for the material you're using, whether it's wood struts, pneumatic, hydraulic, they kind of all work as a system. We're in the habit of setting them and pulling the hoses off, which sometimes is just an equipment thing. So like the far struts down there, we pulled the air lines off once we set them. Neat practice is you can set these collars with rope or like Paratech, not Paratech, power cord or paracord. That's the word I'm looking for. So once you shoot them, you can kind of reach your hand down and set the collars and take the air off. What else do we have going on here? Go back. So you can see a lot of cribbing behind the kind of the bottom of this. So as we got this strut down or this panel down, on this side of the panel is where that whaler, which is a big dimensional piece of lumber, 6x6 or 4x6. Depending on your trench, you can have whalers on the inside as well for L trenches and kind of T trenches. In this case, we didn't have that, but we started shoring behind the strong back. I don't remember if this one got put in. I'll call it backwards with the strong back towards the wall of the trench. I don't remember if that was the decision made to make sure we hit the 6-bys, the whalers correctly. Doesn't really matter. Let's see what else we got.
I mean, the big takeaway is what are we shoring for? Well, we're just trying to secure these boards up against the sides of the trench so that if it tries to collapse again, this is all going to hold it back, and we can continually operate inside of this trench. I mean, that's the big point of what's going on here, and that's why you see too that they'll throw in nails at the edge here, so that we can, so if it does shift at all, the strut isn't just going to fall down to the ground or anything like that.
Yeah, for sure. And again, like I'm a nerd on, rope stuff, and I like math and like the why behind what we're doing. And there's a lot of really great information you can read about like the zones of pressure, and like this zone inside the 2 panels is like the zone of safety. And the idea is to completely compress those against the exposed walls to replace the back pressure that the soil that was there created. Because once you like dig a big hole in the earth like this, when you get into the weeds on it, the tendency to fall over increases based on soil composition and all this other stuff. So if you can get that as tight as possible, you're supposed to backfill with either low pressure bags or bags of the spoils pile, to get that as tight a fit as you can. So there's a lot of wedges stuck in behind there trying to fill in voids, and you're supposed to nail all 4. It looks like we missed 2 there.
I think it says 2 of 4, so I think you're right. But no, that's good. And for the most part, we're going to be using, for those of you that are aware, usually you're going to use swivel bases on there because nothing's going to be 100% perpendicular here. So you want as much adjustment capability as possible. And as Kevin said before too, he talked about like 200 PSI. So this isn't even the same controller that we're using for airbags. We're talking a whole different setup, a whole different system here. We do have a question here. Was there an OSHA investigation, or did this fall under the homeowner? Do you know anything about that?
So interestingly enough, and I can't comment, OSHA did come out. But what was interesting about this is that the homeowner had a business not doing this, and I forget what it was. And from my understanding, the people that he was digging with worked for him in this other business, and were like helping him do this. So it was a very gray area because he was not a contractor, so they were not like paid contractors doing this work. I don't know what the end result was of the OSHA investigation, but they did come out.
Is that a word to all my logs guys if I ask them to come help me dig a hole at my house or something like that?
Yeah, no, and it's a very, very gray area. It was the impression I got from the investigator.
All right, very good. What's the reason? So someone asked, what's the reason for the panels being opposite? I'm not 100%. Are you referring to the fact that they're on both sides of the trench? And that would just be either side of the trench could collapse. So although I believe this is the area that collapsed here, we wouldn't be able to just shoot a strut into the panel here and then against the dirt over on that side, because that would just dig right through the dirt. So you need the panel on both sides to also distribute the weight.
I think they might just be referring to that one that got put in backwards. Yeah,
this one. Is there a reason that the strong back's on the back side of this panel right here, Kevin?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I was not in charge of placing the panels. I was running ops. I don't know if they made the decision to flip it because of putting the whaler behind there.
Yeah, makes sense. And again, it's very easy to pick apart pictures. It was you guys did a tremendous job here. It's not luck, but it's, as you said, luck comes into play, but you guys did an excellent job here, because this is not an easy trench. When you talk about trench, a lot of times it's, that 6 to 8 foot going down to that 12, 13, 14 foot really complicates things. And when you look at some of those other pictures, those guys are deep down there. You really, you can't see them. So definitely a challenging situation. What's your
No,
daily staffing? Answer that question, and then what's your daily staffing? Someone asked.
23.
23 is the daily staffing. So did you guys hire back or have mutual aid in the city or anything like that while you guys were operating here?
I wish I had a good answer for you, Dan. I believe we did. Because we
Okay.
were like, I think I cleared at 5 o'clock from a 1 o'clock dispatch, basically.
Okay.
So usually when we go to like a second alarm for a fire, we hire back. But I think there was mutual aid companies covering, and I think we hired back.
Okay. I don't know if I had another question. I don't really have too much else. If anyone has any other questions, I do want to open it up to anybody else from Bethel or Danbury. If you're on the chat and you want to, chime in at all or comment or, pick on anything that you have in addition, please feel free. But I think it was a great overview of kind of, it can't happen in small town USA until it does. And that doesn't mean that we should be going out and buying trench rescue equipment and doing trench classes, but we have to be prepared for that incident, and we shouldn't show up saying we have no idea who to call or where it's coming from or how long it's going to take to get here or anything like that. That's the other side of the coin, if you will.
Yeah, no, and we talked about that part a lot, Dan, after the fact. Like, I think it's incumbent upon us, we're like in that neck of the woods. There's Ridgefield next door, which is a career department. And then we're surrounded by kind of smaller communities. And I think it's important for like the department that has the assets, but also the surrounding departments to like talk in advance. Like, if we call you, what do we get? Can you do this? Can you not? How many people will show up every time? To your point, because you can't like wing this. You shouldn't wing this stuff.
And where I say you don't need a trench rescue class, I mean the tech side. You don't need to get your tech certification, but certainly, anyone can go to Home Depot and rent an excavator. You don't need any sort of anything other than a license, and maybe not even then, just a credit card. So anyone could be digging a hole that's 13 foot deep and getting into it. And so even if you're not going to get the training on the technician side or operations side, just knowing what a trench panel is, knowing how to set up the struts, knowing how to connect hoses can make a big difference for the techs that come in. I kind of put it, in the city, what they did was it's on the hazmat side, but they taught guys how to get into level A suits that have zero hazmat training, just for the purpose of going into the hot zone and pulling out bodies. So, it's kind of the same thing here, where we don't want you pulling out bodies, but you don't need to know the knowledge base of it, but you need to at least be able to get the equipment from point A to point B, and maybe be able to assist the technicians with what they need to do in order to, perform the operation. So, Pat, any last stuff?
Not really. Just what I said from the minute we left there was that calling Danbury was really our only option, and those guys really saved their asses that day.
Team effort. Kevin, I think you kind of summarized it extremely well, and I definitely appreciate both you guys coming on tonight. So do you have anything else, Kevin, that you wanted to touch on?
No, train.
Yeah.
And like I said, like, there's great resources that cost like $80 that could make great drill nights, discussion points, kind of awareness level stuff. The other big one for me, like, I know all those guys in Stony Hill and Bethel. I used to volunteer in Bethel 20 years ago. So getting out into those surrounding communities and talking to each other, having coffee, doing like an organized like joint drill, makes it that much easier. When I show up, I think I saw Chief Brewy on here from Bethel.
He mentioned his takeaway was everyone worked really well together.
He met me at the door of my rig when I showed up. He's like, "Hey, this is what you got. This is what's going on." And I know Ed. We've known each other a long time, so knowing each other, I think, in advance is helpful. And like you said, even if you've never done trench before, if you can run a skill saw or a chainsaw, hey, come with me to the cut station. I need help.
Yeah,
that's huge. No, it went great. Everyone worked really well together. But you got to train regularly to do that stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I want to thank everyone for joining. I'm just putting up the kind of remainder of our seminars. But this was great having both of you guys on here tonight. And next week, was it Monday, Tuesday? I don't even know anymore what day anything is. But the 16th, I'll just go with the 16th. I'm doing radios in the fire service. So many of you guys know Mike Gardella from Communication Services. So he's going to come on and do a similar kind of question and answer. It is not going to be deep in depth of radio nerd level because that is well beyond me. But I want him to be able to answer any questions that you guys have about radios, technology, MDTs, things like that. And then you guys can see the rest of them up here, and they're on our site and everything like that. But we had a lot of guys tonight. We had about, I think, 60 at the peak. And, you know, definitely thank you all for joining us, Kevin and Pat. I think I would know your name by now. Thank you very much for joining us and giving us your rundown of that evening. I really appreciate it. And I've already gotten a few comments of guys, you know, saying that they appreciated it and enjoyed the presentation. So thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Yeah, you're very welcome, Dan. If anyone wants to reach out, please do.
Yeah, why don't you have the chat up there? Why don't you just put your information in the chat in case anyone wants to reach out to you? I guess I could put it too, but I'll let you do it.
I'm happy to answer any questions, take any constructive criticism, doesn't matter.
All right. Pat, everyone can find you on Facebook, so that's all right.
Am I getting paid for this?
Nope. You want your 1099 at the end of the year too?
Nope.
I will for those that want to watch this, I will get it up on YouTube in the next couple of days. So I have a Flash Fires a channel on YouTube. I'll get it up there in the next couple of days. So all right, well, thank you all. Have a good night, and hopefully I'll see a lot of you guys next week. The link will be going out tonight for next week's, or tonight or tomorrow for next week's class. So look for it online, and thank you all. Have a safe night. See you all soon.
Shout out